This is Product Management. Welcome. We're here to learn from brilliant minds across numerous disciplines that fuel the modern product manager. Let's take a deep dive into user experience, innovation, design, development, metrics, and more. Do you want more product management tactics and research? Subscribe at thisisproductmanagement.com to receive the latest updates from this podcast.
I'm your host, Mike Fishbein. This is Product Management, a podcast produced by Alpha. Welcome back. On this episode, I'll be speaking with Cindy Alvarez, the Director of User Experience at Yammer, a Microsoft company. Cindy explains how to advocate for Lien methodologies within a large organization, how to turn customer interviews into meaningful insights, and how to get started on customer development today.
My name is Cindy Alvarez, and right now I run a research team for Microsoft. That's still something of a surprise to me. I've spent my whole life in startups and doing pretty much every role in the customer experience segue, product management, interaction design, visual design, now research. And in all of those areas, I've done what we now call customer development, but it's something I was doing before it had a name. And basically, that's the art of figuring out who is going to buy your product, making sure there is an audience of people who's going to buy your product as you're building it, before you're building it, and before you're committing too many resources to it. Customer development is product management.
Cindy's already spoken briefly about her transition from a startup to one of the largest and most prominent technology companies. But I'm intrigued to learn more about how she got into product and UX in the first place.
You know, it started in college. I got all the way to college without really having used a computer at all. And when I first got one, it was this terrifying and amazing thing that I started spending more time with. And one of the first basic college jobs I had was doing tech support for one of the university divisions. I went to Harvard. And so I was doing tech support for the psychology department, and which meant that I was helping Nobel Prize winners and some of the most brilliant people you'll ever meet figure out how to resurrect a file from a floppy drive, or why they couldn't find this file, or why when they clicked this key, this unexpected thing happened. And it made me realize that there's this huge gap between what technology can do and how humans perceive that. And so that whole thing of how do people react to technology and what are the subtleties that make people decide to use something or buy something has been an area that I've basically chased my entire career. So from there, I started out doing visual design. Then I moved into interaction design, so I had a little more control over the story. I wanted to get closer to the root of the problem, so I spent a few years doing product management for a couple of startups. And then I had the opportunity to join Yammer before it was acquired by Microsoft, because they basically had a very strong analytics team and a very strong product team, but they were missing that customer viewpoint. And not the voice of the customer where people come in and have a list of demands, but they said, we need to know how people are really using our product and what's really going to make them choose to use it or not use it, and not just from a numerical perspective. So that's where I came in. I built the team here. We were acquired by Microsoft, and since then, we got a new CEO at Microsoft, and that's changed a lot of what Microsoft as a corporation has been interested in. So there's now a lot more focus on usage and on customers. And so now there's a lot of demand for what I do.
When she saw the smartest people in the world struggle to use computers and software, Cindy was inspired to learn more about the art and science of interface and experience design. That might be one of the best reasons I've heard on the show for getting into the discipline. Now she's working at Microsoft and evangelizing customer development and Lien methodologies. What's that like?
From the time that Yammer was acquired, even with Ballmer at the helm, there was a big push that the reasons that Yammer was acquired by Microsoft was that we had the expertise in data-informed development, in rapid product development, in building for adoption and usage as opposed to sales. So those are things that we were supposed to provide as a company. And our early leaders, the co-founders of the company, did a lot of evangelizing at the leadership level. So it's something that came pretty naturally to me to realize that, senior VPs want to talk to other senior VPs, but if it's just the execs talking about how this stuff gets done, we all know in most companies, the work gets done by people lower down the pipeline. I mean, even I joke on my team, I don't actually do work these days. It's the people who work for me who do this phenomenal work. So I wanted to go out and talk to other team managers and doers and practitioners. And so I had a lot of support internally to just go up to Redmond and basically see who bites. And so immediately after we were acquired, that's just what I did. I brought a couple people from my team and we camped out in a big open area and we emailed everyone that we could think of that we knew there. And we said, we're going to have a Lien day. And anyone who's read the Lien Startup or has heard about it or is exploring Agile and just wants to talk about stuff, come visit us. And we sat there for 4 hours and we had about 30 people come and go, which is very small at a Microsoft-sized company. But those 30 people, among them were some really interesting connectors. And so I started getting emails from other people saying, hey, next time you're up, I want to talk to you. And so this has been an ongoing thing. When Satya Nadella took over as CEO, that really amplified that because he came in and his first thing was, look, we're getting our butts kicked by a lot of startups who are moving faster, who are developing products faster, and who are building things that people really want to use. And so he put out the challenge to people that we need to care about usage. Sales is a trailing indicator. If people are using our products, we're going to do okay. And so suddenly there have been a lot of teams and a lot of higher up leaders are saying, okay, well, how do we do this? How do we figure out what it is that our customers really want?
Sales is a trailing indicator, but if people are using your products, revenue will follow. That's Microsoft's new mantra, and Cindy is focused on advocating for new methodologies across the organization. But adoption doesn't come overnight.
These are the people who, they have other things going on in their lives. They may love their jobs, but they've got kids, they've got hobbies. And so if you ask them to do something that's very different without providing the tools, they'll kind of nod and smile and then not do it. And so that's one of the really interesting things. For the first, perhaps year and a half of talking to people, it was a lot of philosophy and kind of basic tactics of how you get out there and talk to people. And now what's been the thing that people really want more of is how do we get hands-on coaching? And more importantly, if I come and I go to one of your workshops or listen to your talks and do this and I bring it back to my team, how do I deal with the skepticism of my coworkers or my manager? Because they're going to say, but we can't do that and here's why. And there's always a reason to overcome those, but when people don't have them, then they get shot down. And so a lot of times we'll focus on, okay, here's some tactics. Now, if you were to try and do this in your day job without me there, what would you run into? What obstacles would you run into? And people have been really phenomenally able to come up with those objections and say, oh, well, here's all the things my coworkers will complain about. And we can tackle those one at a time and say, okay, your marketing person is complaining because you can't give them timelines. Well, in the past, you gave them timelines that weren't particularly accurate. And that's not Microsoft, that's any company. So let's remind them that they never had very accurate timelines, but also let's tell them what we can give them, which is, a good story about philosophy or a good story about how we learned something from a customer or how we made a mistake and we were able to course correct because of this new approach we're taking.
Interestingly, Cindy says she kicked off her advocacy with a Lien Day. What was that like and why was that her strategy?
Pretty much every big corporation has some sort of corporate innovation arm now. They're either doing a specific Lean startup initiative or some kind of sponsored entrepreneur program. And where most of those go wrong is that everyone gets excited and they do a lot of planning and they say, okay, we're going to have a program and this is how it's going to work. And that doesn't work whether you're a startup or a big enterprise. You need to kind of feel people out and see what the real pain points are. It's basically customer development for customer development. And so in that Lean Day, what I was just kind of getting is, what are people interested in? What do they know and not know? Where do they feel like they're blocked? And that gave me a lot of leverage to figure out who I could talk to next. Could I talk to people's managers? Could I talk to people's coworkers? Could I connect someone that was in one team in one part of the organization with another team in another part of the organization and just trust that them giving each other moral support would help? And then that has phenomenally, by the way. So now my team here in San Francisco, and being in San Francisco is a great sort of insulator. It allows us to still maintain a lot of San Francisco-ness as opposed to Redmond-ness. But we've been hosting teams to come down and they'll basically embed with us for a week. And they bring down projects and their own customer lists. And my team and I will just kind of sit around at the table and be available. So we'll look at their questions, we'll help them rewrite a script. If they need to get in touch with a certain kind of person, we'll help use our friends and family network to do that. And then we'll sit in on interviews and give them immediate feedback on how they could improve them. And they'll sit in on our interviews so they can kind of hear how we do it. And that happens over the course of a week. So it's not a training. It's very hard for people to say, I'm going to commit to a week of training. It's doing, where you just happen to have someone there who can say, okay, that was great, but next time you might want to try this.
Cindy launched a Lien Day as a Lien experiment in and of itself to learn better how key stakeholders would initially react. That's then influenced her ongoing strategy. So let's talk a little bit about that strategy. Customer development has strong roots in the startup community. How does it manifest in a massive global organization?
I think the first big challenge with customer development, you look at how is customer development different at a startup and a large company. And the first thing is that in a large company, there's a good chance that you have people saying, well, we just can't do that. And if you kind of prod them, you find out that that's really, well, I just assume that we can't do that, or it's never been done before. And so your first step is really getting over that and unpacking that. Like, why have we never done that before? Is it actually forbidden in any way? And if you have a company like Microsoft, who, let's be honest, has been sued a lot, we have a big legal department, and they are incentivized to be cautious. And that means that things that seem like they might come close to invading customer privacy, people get very, very concerned about. And so that's where you end up needing those connections across organizations, because you need to be able to basically cite prior law. And so I have some friends in legal departments in other parts of the organization who can say, look, this is okay, this is legit, it's got our blessing, so other people should be able to do it as well. And there are other teams that have drafted off us at Yammer as well. So one of them is just getting past the we can't do it. The other is that, to be very honest, if you're a startup, you can talk to people, you can make up that you have a product, you can talk about a solution that you're going to solve and then abandon it, and nothing happens. There's no fallout, essentially. No one's heard of you before, and they certainly don't chase you down afterwards and say, hey, I thought you were going to build this product. What happened? But that is exactly what happens in a large company if you lead people to believe that something's going to happen and then don't follow through. So it is very important to set proper expectations, and they are very different expectations than from what we've set in the past. So in the past, it might be a customer feedback session. It might look like a customer saying, hey, we'd like this feature, or we won't upgrade until we get this feature. It's often a threat. And then a product manager saying, okay, we can commit to it in this timeline. And the other person says, all right, I'll be waiting for it. And then, it may or may not get delivered in that timeline, but that's the fiction that we're all used to. I want this. Okay, this is when it will be done. Okay, well, it didn't make it in this release, but it'll happen soon, I promise. And that's what people are used to. You need to approach customers with a very clear expectation that this is exploratory. We're just learning. We're not necessarily going to build this. Based on what we learn, we'll make a decision. And I've found that customers are actually quite amenable to that if you are very straightforward with it. And sometimes people will say, well, when am I going to see this? And I'll say, well, we can't promise that you're going to see it, to be honest. And also to give people kind of an out, because some customers just aren't interested in dealing with that. They think it's speculative, it's a waste of time. We don't want to hear it. So you need to find the right customers. You need to set the right expectations. And then you need to kind of take a step back and shift the relationship a little bit. And this is another thing that can be really difficult. In large companies, you have existing relationships. And so the person who's been working with a partner for 5 years, there's something a little bit just frankly embarrassing about saying, so tell me about your day-to-day. Because your client is going to say, your vendor is going to say, look, we've been working together for 5 years. Surely you know my day-to-day by now. But the truth is that we don't. And so a lot of times I say it's easy to bring in an extra person that a customer's never met before and have them lead the interview, because then you get over that awkwardness. And this is where having something like a dedicated research team can be very handy, not because I think researchers are the only people who should be doing customer development, but because we're typically unknowns. So I can enter a relationship that's been going on for a decade, or more, this being Microsoft, and say, hi, I'm from another division. I just want to ask you some questions. I don't know much about your background, so I apologize if we're covering ground that my colleagues here already know, but please just humor me. And then we'll go through, and inevitably people will reveal things that my coworkers in the room especially over the phone, my coworkers in the room are kind of standing there with their jaws dropped, like, we had no idea. We've been working with this guy for 10 years and we had no idea that this was his main problem.
Managing expectations, both internally and externally, seems to be the key to customer development.
So you're setting that right expectation. You're setting the expectation internally that we're not sure what we're going to get to. That's another thing that I find is different from a startup and a large company. Startups are accustomed to uncertainty. It's not that hard to sell your colleagues in a startup on the fact that we're going to talk to a bunch of people and we're not really sure what we're going to learn. Everyone's okay with that because the kind of people who join startups are okay with that. But in a large company, we've allowed ourselves to create this fiction of predictability. And it is fiction because competitors come out of nowhere, technology keeps changing. We can't really predict what's going to happen next year, but we kind of think we can. And so the notion of going on these interviews and saying, well, we're not really sure what we're going to learn, that's very jarring to people. And so a lot of times people in large companies who are struggling with this, I'll say, you might want to just kind of do some interviews guerrilla style and then come tell everyone what you learned versus saying, we're going to do this or we're going to try and get buy-in for it. Just do it and then find some interesting stuff and kind of dangle it in front of your manager and say, hey, there's more where this came from. We just need to keep talking to people.
Once she finally gets buy-in for doing customer development, how does Cindy teach product teams to ensure the feedback they're getting is unbiased, reliable, and actionable?
First of all, it's a focus on how are customers making decisions? What is driving them to make a decision? What are their constraints? What are their budget needs? And what are they doing today? So I think what typically happens is that when we go out and talk to customers, we fall prey to a lot of cognitive biases. And it's just because this is what our brains do. And so we tend to ask leading questions and we tend to ask future predicting questions. And so by a leading question, I mean something like, Mike, wouldn't you say that? It doesn't matter what I say after that. The odds are much stronger that you're going to agree with a question that starts off that way. Wouldn't you like? Don't you think? Wouldn't it be great if? Don't you hate it when? Those are all leading questions. And whenever you ask one, the answer you get is not going to be super valid. The other thing that we love to ask, because it's what we want to know, is the equivalent of, will you buy this? Do you think if you had this product, you would do this? If that gym opened next door, how many days per week would you go? If you had the opportunity to do this, would you? And humans are just very bad at answering those questions. We tend to discount long-term benefits. We like to think about short-term benefits. We have aspirational future selves. We all say we're going to go to the gym 5 times a week and then we don't. And so when you start out asking either of those two kinds of questions, you really taint the feedback you're getting. And this is where the hands-on coaching is really helpful, to learn to ask questions in a way that is much more neutral and much more focused on current behavior. So if I wanted to know about your gym going habits, I wouldn't say, how often do you go to the gym? Because you're going to give me a socially acceptable answer. I would say, look at your calendar for the past week. How many times did you go to the gym? So now I'm asking a question about past behavior. And past behavior doesn't lie. It's the thing that you did. Now, you could say, I went to the gym once last week, but that wasn't typical. And then I might say, okay, well, look at the last month on your calendar. How many days per week did you go for the last month? For the last 3 months? And kind of push to see that, actually no, while you'd like to think that you're the kind of person who goes to the gym every weekday, at best you make it twice per week. And there's no judgment around that. It's actually, that's the truth. And so if I know that truth, your past behavior is this, there's a very good chance that your future behavior is going to look a lot like that past behavior. The other thing is just asking questions in a non-yes-no manner, because that gets people to give you more detail. So, would you use this feature? You're probably going to say yes, and that doesn't tell me a whole lot. If you had this feature, how would you use it? That's going to tell me a little bit more, because some people will say, well, it'd just be nice to have, and that's not very telling. Other people will actually, think for a minute and say, oh, well, if I had that feature, it would allow me to do this, which would allow this to happen, and here's the benefit I would get. And when you hear answers like that, you're like, you're onto something there. But you have to frame a question in the way to get those answers.
Earlier, Cindy mentioned the risks associated with customer development, whether it's admitting during an interaction that your team doesn't really know about the customer's day-to-day activities, or showing a prototype of a bad idea. Besides bringing in a different department to conduct research, what are some of the other strategies Cindy recommends?
So we'll start with research because that's probably the first thing you're going to do. Customer development, talking to people, research. For that, I'd say the most important thing is to choose your audience wisely. And here you can rely on your kind of feet on the ground. If you have account managers or customer support people, and you ask questions like, which customers are the most amenable to changes? Like when we have new releases, when we've had new releases in the past, who are the customers who were curious and tried new things and didn't put up as much of a struggle? Because those are people who are probably have more of a growth mindset. We're going to be open to it. Who are the customers who are always asking for more features in a sort of not demanding ransom way, but in a, gosh, it would be great if we could only do this one thing? And who are the customers that we generally have a good relationship with who use our products a lot? So they're dedicated, they've committed a lot of time to us already. Basically, the better friend someone is, the more room you have to work with them. So identify those customers first. Do your research on those customers. Someone who is a big name customer who's paid you a lot of money but maybe doesn't have very high usage, that's a risky person to talk to. That's someone who's most likely to take what you say wrong. Then when you get to the MVP part, there's a couple strategies. One is to actually have a secondary brand to release things under. So Microsoft has an entity called the Garage that's been doing some test apps. And so those apps do have Microsoft listed as a publisher, but they're not under any Microsoft umbrella. And so there's a lot more freedom to kind of experiment. There have been a couple that were launched for single platform, for Android only, for iOS only. And that's okay because they're not Microsoft Office or Microsoft Windows. They're this kind of sub-brand. So that's another way to help. Another one is to simply limit the people who have access to an MVP. So again, thinking about that audience, who are your more adventurous customers, who are your customers who might be using more cloud products or using more mobile products or some sign of being just more technologically adventurous. And then finally, you just don't have the same freedom for MVPs. This is the buzzkill one, which is you just can't release something that's crap if you're a big company. But that doesn't mean it has to be fully featured. That means that the features you release have to be polished.
Overall, it seems like companies are increasingly adopting lean methodologies. I asked Cindy about this trend and where she thinks the world of product management will be in the next 10 years.
So I think in large companies, product teams are going to have some pretty key changes over the next 10 years. One is going to be the elevation of both design and research. So right now, those roles tend to be subordinate. In a lot of companies, they don't even exist. But they're sort of, people who get called in towards the end of a project to make it pretty or to do usability testing. And that just doesn't work. In order to create a great product that people will buy, you need to be informed by research from the start, and you need to have designers understanding what they're designing for so that they can bring the best design solutions to bear. So I think those teams will be much more elevated. I think that quantitative analytics is going to become a bigger thing, and not in the sense of, oh yeah, there's an Omniture guy who can run reports, but in the sense of this is a product analyst who asks questions about usage. She sits right here next to a product manager and will say things like, really, we could focus on that area, but only 10% of people ever get to that page. So maybe we should look farther upstream so that we can affect a greater percentage of our population. So I think we're going to see that as well. We are going to see more data-informed product development. And that doesn't mean being a slave to numbers, but doing both research and analytics to figure out best where we should be investing and being really sure that what we have built is working. So customer development is a great way to find out what we're pretty sure customers want and will do. But the only way we really know is once they start paying us. And that means that we need analytics and we need reports so that we can see that sooner versus later. If we wait for sales numbers to come in at the end of the year, that's too late.
That's a very intriguing vision for the future. But what does tomorrow need to look like for that to happen?
I'm generally just so enthusiastic about the premise of talking to customers, and I've talked and I've written a lot about how to do it particularly well. And I think if there's one thing I'd want to leave people with, it's don't worry about doing it perfectly, because talking to customers is something that you just get better at over time. You're not going to be perfect the first time, and you will get better no matter where your starting point is. But the worst thing you can do is treat it as something that you'll get to when you have time. Like, oh, once I figure that out, I'll start doing it. No, just start doing it today. You will learn so much. You will learn so much that your competitors are probably already learning. So you really have to. And it's so good for morale. In the beginning, you have this sort of sense of like, oh man, we don't know anything. We're getting it all wrong. But quickly that shifts to just this amazement of, I had no idea that I could learn this. And it's not just for people who are product managers as well. We bring our engineers into customer calls and they walk out just amazed, like, this is great. I've been building this tool for, months, years, and I never knew just how much impact it was having on a person. So start today.
Explaining the risks and also the upside of customer development, Cindy has given us quite a bit to think about as we advocate for lean methodologies in our own environments. Next up is the benchmark. Let's see how Cindy reflects on the next series of questions we ask all interviewees to ask themselves.
How do I eat my own dog food? Well, I sort of alluded to this earlier. I would say that a lot of what I do is customer development for customer development. So as I'm trying to get other teams at Microsoft to adopt change, to adopt an experimental mindset, to talk to their customers, I need to know what they will actually do. I need to know what their current behaviors and constraints are. And so a lot of times, my first foray is having a conversation and kind of getting a lay of the land before I jump in with solutions. So I might talk to someone for a half an hour and realize that a half-day workshop isn't going to work for their team. What would work better is if they sent down 2 people to sit in my office for a week and get hands-on coaching. Or I might realize that another team actually isn't ready for a workshop, but what they really should do is talk to this other team over here who's doing a similar approach and has, made it work already. So I think the customer development for customer development is something that I do on a pretty daily basis. I also, as a manager, we use Yammer. We do all of our work on Yammer. And so I'm kind of constantly making sure that the things I'm doing are working for both my research team and the product org that we work with. So I might say, I'm thinking I'm going to start on this. My assumption is that these are the biggest problems for us to focus on. And sometimes I'll get someone on my team saying, actually, we're really swamped on this other thing right now. So, there's another thing we could work on. Or someone else in product will say, that's really interesting, but this other thing came up. And so I'm kind of constantly trying to do that sense of what is the real problem and how can I best solve it on a day-to-day basis. How do I get out of the office? Well, physically, I'm based in San Francisco and I travel to Redmond a lot, which is, technically getting into another office. But I found that one of the things I do there is to just always try a new approach to talking to people. One of the things I do, and I've talked about this in my book, is that whenever I talk to someone, I'll end that conversation by asking who else I should talk to. And so I'm always getting a list of more customers to talk to. Another thing that people on my team have done and that I've employed as well is, if you read anything about customer development, people will inevitably talk about coffee shops. Like, oh, we can talk to people in coffee shops. And don't accost people in coffee shops, please. They hate that. But there's a workaround, which is something that a woman on my team invented, so I can't take credit for. But she went into a coffee shop, walked up to the barista, and said, "Hey, can I open a tab? Here's my credit card. As people come in, if they seem like they're not in a hurry, can you offer them to have their beverage comped if they come talk to me?" And she's like, you use your judgment. If they seem like they're cranky or in a hurry or you just don't want to ask them, that's your call. But, I'd really appreciate it. And, we'll tip you well at the end of this. And that has been a really great approach because you don't need to accost people. There are some people who are totally willing to get a free macchiato and sit down for 10 minutes with someone. And there are other people who just say, no, thank you, but they don't have to turn you down directly. So it saves a ton of social awkwardness. And then at the end of the time, you just go and you pick up your tab and you sign it and you tip the barista and smile and thank them. And that's been a really great approach for just getting kind of basic feedback from your average person on the street. What am I reading right now? I am reading a lot of science fiction short stories. And I wasn't a lifelong science fiction reader. I actually started reading science fiction while I was writing my book because for some reason it was the only reading I could do without feeling guilty. I'm not sure why that is, but whenever I read fiction, I would be like, oh, I should be writing instead. But it's just really well suited to kind of walking and reading. And I think especially the golden era science fiction, there were so many things that people assumed about the future. And there was such a great way that writers kind of said, well, what if this thing happened? And it almost felt like its own exploratory, if this thing is true, what would happen next? And I think just that sense of being able to look at the world and say, well, it might not turn out this way, it might turn out a different way, is really interesting. And then also looking back on it, it's funny to see the things that they got wrong. Like in golden era science fiction, everyone is smoking. People are taking like hypersonic space shuttles to Pluto and smoking. What's a recurring product management nightmare I have? Is it a nightmare if you've lived it? I feel like there are things that, as when I was a product manager and also before that when I ran a pretty big product design team, I think my nightmare is the feature that seems like it's an innocuous boost for the end user, but turns into a nightmare. So you see something on the kind of list of things we could build, and it's something that customers have requested, and maybe it's not perfectly in line with your product vision, but you think, wow, we'd really win some hearts and minds with this, and it won't take that long. Let's just do this. It'll be a quick win for us. And then it's not. And then it becomes this sort of nightmarishly long thing, and you either burn a lot of resources on it or you release something that's kind of half-assed, and then instead of being a win, your customers are more angry at you. I feel like I've lived that a few times, and I'm just constantly in fear that I will somehow bring one on again.
Listeners can find out more about Cindy on Twitter @CindyAlvarez or purchase her book, Lien Customer Development. That's our show. Until next time, this is Mike Fishbein from Alpha.
Do you want more product management tactics and research? Subscribe at thisisproductmanagement.com to receive the latest updates from this podcast.